going to make a little video about things that I'm thinking about. At this moment in time, I'm working on my psychedelic entheogen chapter, and so far it's about 18 pages long, and I've only just started on my DMT. So it's probably going to be something in the region of maybe 35 pages. So it'll be the longest chapter hitherto. But whilst I'm doing that, I get pop-ups of other information. And one of the pop-ups was the relationship that you guys may have with the concept of God. And I'm speaking from a spiritual or a philosophical perspective, not a fundamentalist, religious perspective, because there's no movement, there's only dogma there. We can't do anything with that. We can't go anywhere with it. It's a dead end. Fundamentalism, and so when we look, some of you guys may be thinking that you're not interested in religion and beliefs, and because you'd rather be an adherent to science, to knowledge. But I'm going to write a whole chapter on this, by the way, so again, this is only very succinct. But if you asked yourselves what actually you do know in relation to science, then I would speculate that it's almost nothing. You see, we live our lives thinking, believing that we live on a ball floating around the sun, which is one of 9 other planets, and that is floating around our Milky Way galaxy, which is one of trillions. And so we take all these things on board. We take on board that we are human beings and that we're real and all this stuff's real. And yet, even the science tells us that it's not. And so it's very paradoxical. But for people who just want simple lives, then you just go with whatever you feel or you see. And this stuff around us is, like Einstein says, is a pretty convincing illusion. But all the same, it's an illusion. So when people discount religion because they are belief systems or faith-based systems, what I'm going to posit in this chapter is that it's no different to scientism, because scientism also is a religion, because as far as the vast majority of people on this planet are concerned, we have to have an adherence of belief in what other people tell us, because we don't know that the sun's 93 million miles away. We don't know that the world has a circumference of 24,000 miles. We've got no idea that the moon is 245,000 miles away, and all this other stuff that we take for granted. But if we asked ourselves, in relation to the faith-based way of thinking, religions, and the faith-based way of thinking in science, what's the difference? Now, you may say that, well, I know this is real, Aaron. Well, again, read some quantum physics books and you might just be shocked to your core. and you might come away with your tail between your legs feeling quite foolish because you've been had all of your lives. Some people, they don't want to believe in a so-called man in the sky, or that there was a man called Jesus and he died for our sins, and all these sort of things. And I was the same, several years ago. But what happens is, when you have a look at what you actually really do know, there is nothing that I could profess as knowing as concrete, because all my knowledge is highly dependent on a very fallible brain and the very fallible perception of my senses, which are notoriously unreliable. So, premised in our senses being notoriously unreliable, then why is it that we seem to have such an adherence to certain things? It doesn't make sense, does it? It smacks of insecurity. And ultimately, it's just because we want to believe that the world is round, that we're flying around the sun, that we're real human beings, we really do have an existence. But those beliefs are no different to Christians believing that there's a man in the sky, Jesus died for our sins, we are really spirit having a human experience. And so when you look at the power, at the veracity of the integrity of all of those things I've just mentioned, then they would all fall into exactly the same realm of imagination. It's all imagination. You see, in relation to religions and beliefs, you get people like prophets or pastors, chaplains, popes, and all these sort of people, which seem to have this demand that we believe them because they have been gifted by God to know more than we do, and so that's why they are in those positions of authority and autonomy over us. And so, i.e. the Pope of Rome, what do we know about what he knows? He's just a man the same as the rest of us. Had years of life experience the same as the rest of us. Is what he's saying that really his knowledge is divine? It comes direct from God himself, because God chose him, albeit these popes have to get elected. And so, again, another paradox. But when there's people in positions of power like that, they proclaim to have had experience and first-hand knowledge and relationship with God or Jesus, and we can do nothing but either accept that or dismiss it. Now, if you are a faith-based person, then you'll accept that because you're used to accepting things on faith. You're told or encouraged to accept everything that is said in the Bible on faith. And so when you've got people which are heads of churches and religions and they say this stuff to you, well, you've already been conditioned into just believing, and so you just do it again. And then of course the same happens all over the world with father figures and teachers and governments and all that sort of thing. We just, because we've got no way of knowing, we either accept or we dismiss. And in lots of instances, it's in our best interest that we accept. Because if we discount absolutely everything, then you'll end up in nihilism. Because if you seek long and hard for the root of everything, that's where you'll end up, because that's what this thing really is, if we discount spirit. But if we don't discount spirit, then we could say, well, all the material facets of this dimension are Maya, but the spirit is real. And it's spirit which I am, and so I have an existence. And I'm not illusory, even though everything around me is conjured up by my senses, via my vision, via the colours that I can see, due to how my eyes have been constructed. How does a bird see this world? How does a bee see the world? How does a newt see the world? All these creatures, they've got different designs, and so therefore they see a whole different world. So this world isn't per se what we see it is. And even the things that we see, that these are nettles, ouch, and they sting, and this up here is an elder tree, and all the rest of this stuff. If we didn't have these words and concepts, then it would just be a blur to us. And that's, what the world really is, until we overlay our consciousness onto it. And so it's our consciousness which creates all this stuff out of a belief system that these are stinging nettles, and these are trees and such. And so belief. And so what I'm saying is that, and lots of famous people have been noted as saying that, well, when it comes down to having a choice of believing whether there's God or not, it would pay you to believe that there was, because there are benefits to believing that there is, whereas there are no benefits if you don't believe. And if it turns out that there really is a heaven, then if you don't believe, then you won't be experiencing that if it's up there. So when we look then, and we can very easily dismiss things because we've been programmed, haven't we? In the Occident, which is to say the Western world, we have more and more been programmed to believe in science, and this whole thing with this nonsense that just happened over a 2 or 3 year period, every breath on the media, it was trust the science, trust the science, trust the science. And yet we didn't know anything about the science. We've got no clue of microbial biology and viruses and all this sort of thing. We just had to believe somebody, didn't we? And so just imagine then, in the Dark Ages, when the only things that they were telling you to believe was religion. Well, everybody would be indoctrinated into the central belief of that. But now we're moving out of that, because the powers that be want to manipulate us into another region. And so they've created a new religion, which is science. And so when you think about it, there is no difference. It's just a case of whether you want to accept it or not. And some people still get caught into the trap of falling back on tangibility, saying that, yeah, this thing is real, Aaron, I'm touching it, this, that and the other. Well, you have to learn more about how your senses work and what the molecular structure of these things are. And then you discover that, well, there's no actual matter there at all. And so you've been in a delusion all of your lives. So to finish this little discourse off then now, and I'm going to be speaking about it, like I say, in much greater detail in the book, it's a choice. If we want to believe that there's a God and we're spirit and there's a heaven and we could live forever, then we can choose that option. If we want to believe that we are just molecules and chemicals that have been pulled together via evolution, which has no substance to it at all. By the way, it has absolutely no substance to it. It's just a hypothesis. But if you want to believe in that hypothesis as opposed to the other hypothesis, it's your prerogative. And so, when we think, we find ourselves in very curious territory, don't we? It's interesting, isn't it? What a wonderful world.